Thank you for the lovely warm welcome. My name is Grace Moronfolu. I work for the Crown Prosecution Service. I just want to tell you that I'm a mother of 3 sons. Just to try and tell you a little bit about myself. My youngest son is 12 and my eldest is 30. I live in Derbyshire. And like I said, I work for the Crown Prosecution Service, although I'm not a lawyer. I've worked for the CPS for over 30 years. I love working for the Crown Prosecution Service due to the complexity of the kind of work we do. And the question that was posed to me was, why does race matter? Why does it still matter? Actually, race shouldn't matter at all. But unfortunately, we human beings are so flawed that we need to find something to divide, conquer, oppress, and other each other with. So whether that's race, gender, which is obviously a very useful choice that people use, disability, religious observance, one's age, or one's sexual preferences, your sexual identity, or your sexual orientation. There's lots of reasons and lots of excuses people use to other and hate other people. The death of George Floyd in America sparked a huge global protest and prompted a lot of widespread international condemnation. It also woke us all up in our little bubbles of our existence where we kind of get on with life and we're happy and content. I think the death also kind of burst that bubble and made us all realize how fragile our lives are. So his death kind of burst our safe, comfortable existence, and it's forced us to confront our own ideas about race and more broadly, integration, social diversity, and like I said, the fragilities of our own existence. Racial inequality is often experienced as an imbalance. That's what we're told. We're told it's an imbalance in the distribution of power, economic resources, and opportunities. In reality, it's a bit more than that. For the reality of Black and ethnic minority people, racism is a matter of life and death. It's not just limited to poverty. The stark divides are often measured in household wealth, reflecting centuries of white privilege that's made it particularly difficult for people of color to achieve economic security. That kind of makes us feel, especially as I'm describing myself as a middle-class Black person, sometimes it makes you feel a bit secure. Well, at least I'm not poor. Some of us take comfort in the fact that racism in its harshest reality relates to the poorest in society. So why does race still matter? I'll tell you why it matters. And I'll give you an example of why it matters. There was a gentleman called Tijan Tim. He was an Ivorian banker. Please forgive the pronunciation if I got it wrong. But he was the chief executive officer for a Swiss bank called Credit Suisse from March 2015 to February 2020. A few hours after it was announced that he'd taken up appointment, the stock of this particular bank increased by 7.5%. During his first 2 years, he led the bank through a restructuring process, cutting jobs, and you know what restructuring is like. However, the bank did very well, and his salary was on average $10 million a year. This was huge. I think he was the only man of Black African descent in the world that was in his position. However, it's interesting to reflect on some of his experiences that were observed by other people. And this is a quote from the New York Times, which I found quite interesting. They said a gentleman called Urs Hohner He was the chairman of the board of Credit Suisse. He had a birthday party at a Zurich restaurant to celebrate his 60th birthday. And among the scores of friends and family and business associates that were in attendance, there was a single Black guest, and that was Tejan Them, the bank's chief executive. The party had a theme. It had a theme called Studio 54. I don't know if, I hope you kind of all understand what Studio 54 theme is. It was a theme based in the 70s. It was a kind of hedonistic time in the 70s when soul and funk music was at its highest. You had all these, I won't say debauched parties, but people really went, you know, exaggerate. People really let their hair down. So as part of the theme, Mr. Tiem watched as a Black performer came on stage dressed as a janitor and began to dance while sweeping the floor. Mr. Tiem excused himself and left the room. His partner and a couple of other people at his table, including the chief executive of a British drug company called GSK, also followed him. Eventually, they returned to the party, only to be astonished again to find a group of the birthday celebrant's friends had took to the stage wearing Afro wigs and blacked up faces. It was said from the New York Times, this is what they said. They said for Mr. Tiem, the party was just one of a series of painful incidents that shaped his 5 years at the top of Credit Suisse, where he was the only Black chief executive at the top of that kind of tier of banking. He was the only one in the world at that level. Whether it's labeled racism, xenophobia, or some form of intolerance, what's clear is Mr. Tiem never stopped being seen in Switzerland as somebody who didn't belong. Now, the number of Black chief executives at that level in banking now is zero. There's nobody at that level. And that kind of reminds us that even when a Black person has power, resources, and opportunities, social, racial equalities come into play to minimize, reduce, and disrespect. Okay, that's a terrible situation that we exist in. Who's to blame? Is there a way out of our awful predicament? Yes, I think there is, personally. And I think the first stage out of this journey is self-awareness. Self-awareness is very important because racism just doesn't happen in a vacuum. Racism isn't just something that is done to us by bad people. Prejudice and discrimination is natural. We all do it. This particular prejudice, this racism, doesn't suit us, doesn't favor us. But what about the way we feel justified in hating and condemning, how we feel justified in hating, condemning, and isolating people who are different to us? For example, the poor and the illiterate. What about our gay brothers and sisters, the lesbians and transgenders from within our own communities? We feel justified sometimes in hating, condemning, and isolating them. What about sex workers? We look down on them and think, oh, how disgusting, I could never do that. Never get so low in my life that I would sell my body for sex. What about the mentally ill and the disabled? How do we feel about them if we were told we'd had to take 3 people who had mental health issues into our homes because there was nowhere else for them to go? And one of the bastions of Christianity, I remember from my many years of experience when I was young going to church, single mothers, oh my God, the bane of most Black churches' lives, the terrible single mothers. How were we taught to distrust and disrespect each other? I wonder sometimes, you know, do you think our loathing, to be honest, our loathing for others can be cured by reading a book and educating ourselves, because this is what we're telling white people to do, isn't it? According to a lot of this response to what's happened with George, you know, get a book and educate yourself. Would a book make us feel different about a single mother or someone in the church who comes out as gay? I want to bring, personally, I think that all kinds of discrimination and prejudice are interlinked and overlapped. That's what I think personally. And I want to bring this back to the workplace when we're at work. Because research has shown that, for example, that the lack of progression of BAME people is often hindered when you take obvious discrimination out of the equation. It's often hindered by the lack of a mentor or someone who can support and nurture your career. And you know, in simple terms, a mentor is someone that nurtures you, gives you support, advice, guidance, puts a good word in about you, and creates a positive reinforcement about your character, particularly when you're not in the room. That's what supporters and mentors are supposed to do. That makes a big difference on your career when someone says, oh, that chap's fantastic, actually, if you give him a chance. Even a cleaner can be a supporter if he puts in a good word for somebody, if he puts a good word in the right person's ear, which is why, you know, most people are told, oh, be very kind to the receptionists and the security guards and the PAs when you go into an office, because everybody's word makes a difference. Now you're going to be wondering, where am I going to with this discussion? In relation to racism, I wanted to ask, when was the last time you mentored a BAME colleague, or you were a visible supporter to somebody when that person wasn't in the room? Throughout my career, personally, my mentors and supporters have all been white. I think it's very hard for me to think about someone who's actually pushed, supported my career, especially my early career, not necessarily now, but when I was much younger. I can't think of anybody, to be totally honest. You often had people who would be sympathetic to, you know, my lack of progression or whatever at the time, but I can't remember anyone who was a supporter. So I'm just going to go back to the question again. Does race still matter? I think it does. But then actually, so do the other issues around prejudice and discrimination, hostility and hatred.